city ordinance, and we also, I looked at the video last time, didn't know which ward it is, so now you clearly will know. It's the City of New York Board of Corrections. Kathy Potler is out ill today, our executive director, and Amanda Masters, our deputy, will be sitting in for Kathy. Just a couple of things in terms of opening remarks is that I received from Commissioner Pond a request for a lockdown for GMDC on August 21st. He outlined in that letter a number of incidents, 2 use of 4A incidents, 1 serious injury to inmates, 6 slashing, stabbing incidents, and 1 inmate disturbance. And based on that lockdown, a number of the contraband that was identified and confiscated. And so there was a conversation with the board, and the board granted the ability of the Department of Correction to have the emergency lockdown. In addition, I want to recognize the fact that the City Council recently adopted an ordinance requiring reporting by both the Department of Correction and the Department of Health and Mental Health around punitive segregation, as well as requiring that those statistics be posted on the department's respective websites. And with that, let me turn to Amanda Masters. Amanda?
Just 2 very brief points. One is that the board staff continues to work on rulemaking, and we have been drafting new standards that will be a new chapter 4 having to do with discipline of inmates of punitive seg and alternatives to punitive segregation. And we have been continuing to meet with stakeholders who've been very, very helpful, and we're close to having a draft internally by the end of the month. The second point is that shortly after our last July board meeting, we released, and you can find it on our website, we released a report about access to recreation for inmates who are in punitive segregation in the CPSU at OBCC. And it was an examination of a problem in a particular housing area that has been a systemic problem for the department for many years. And so we tried to take a close look at that problem and made some recommendations that the department could look at in terms of staffing and changing policies.
Commissioner Pond, if I could turn to you in terms of the department's response to the report around recreation.
Good morning. We have the warden for OBCC here, Warden Stokes, and it's really been his task to digest the report and make sure all efficiencies were correct. So that's the warden who wants to speak.
Yes, good morning. Warden Stokes, with regards to recreation CPSU, being in compliance with our operational manual with CPSU recreation. After a review, there were some deficiencies in non-compliance with policy. At this time, we have seen a probably 26% increase in participation of recreation with CPSU.
Dr. Collins?
Is that an increase from the under 10% to?
Yes.
So you're probably now there's 12%
Increase.
but there was before it was less than 10%.
We have seen a 26% increase in participation of recreation.
So that means there are approximately 13% of the prisoners getting recreation now.
Sorry, look up the code.
I'm sorry. Previously, less than 10% of the prisoners in CPSU were going to recreation. Is the increase of 26% mean that rather than there just being 10%, there are 12.5% going now, or the 26%? So 26% of the population are,
yes, sir,
are going now. And have you changed the practice of people coming by at 5 o'clock in the morning and requiring prisoners to be at the gates? The whole system. Yes. Maybe if you can explain. Yes. Maybe if you can explain briefly how you changed the policies.
Yes, the change to the policy is recreation is afforded after sunlight. And what we have done differently is the inmate declines to participate at the initial affording of recreation. The resident is still on the unit. That inmate is given an opportunity to still participate with recreation.
do you anticipate, what's your goal in terms of participation in recreation?
We expect to see an increase in participation.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner?
I'd just like to add, I think we're reasonably confident that everybody who wants to go to recreation today and get to the recreation.
Thank you.
That's a significant increase. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And moving along the agenda, I would ask for a resolution to approve the board minutes of July 8th. Motion by Alton, second by Judge Hamel. All in favor? Aye. Nays? The motion passes to approve our minutes of July 8th. And now we've asked for an update of the Task Force on Behavioral Health and the Criminal Justice System, which is chaired by Elizabeth Glazer, who's the Director of the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. And for those of you who don't have the background, on June 2nd, the Mayor appointed this task force to identify effective options to address issues of mental illness and substance abuse at every stage of the criminal justice system. The task force will recommend and implement strategies to ensure proper diversion routes and treatment for people with mental illnesses or substance abuse within the criminal justice system, as well as before and after contact with the system. The task force, it's a huge task, will present its action plan to the mayor in September, 100 days after its first meeting in mid-June. So with that, let me turn to Liz Glazer.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So I'm not going to be able to say that much substantive because closer. All right. New technology. Is this better? It's not working.
There's a button to the right. Is it to the right?
It's on. I'm just going to speak very loudly. All right. So I'm not going to be able to say too much about the substantive recommendations until obviously the report is released. But I just wanted to give you kind of an outline of where we are and what I think people can expect. So as the chair sort of outlined, this is an effort to take a look really from beginning to end, from way before the kind of criminal justice system engages until individuals are released back into their neighborhoods, to look at every system point along the way, and to understand how we appropriately address both the needs and risks of the mentally ill, and ensure that we're using incarceration sparingly and appropriately. It's been an effort that has engaged many of the people in this room and has had an enormous amount of participation. Almost 500 people have participated already. And we hope that by the end of September, which is the 100 days, it's a sort of a very concentrated effort to look at these issues and to come up with solutions. We'll be presenting our report to the mayor, and we then anticipate going directly into an implementation mode.
Thank you. Questions for Director Glazer? So the bylaw to stay tuned. Thank you. So the next issue on the agenda is the Department of Justice CRIPA, or the Civil Rights of Institutionalized Persons Act investigation in the New York City Department of Corrections, jails on Rikers Island. And there was a report issued, in fact, a 79-page report issued by the U.S. Department of Justice on August 4th, 2014. And just reading from parts of the letter, more specifically, we have focused on whether adolescents are subject to excessive and unnecessary use of force by DOC correction officers and their supervisors, whether DOC adequately protects adolescents from violence by other inmates, and whether DOC's extensive reliance on punitive segregation subjects adolescents to an excessive risk of harm. They primarily focused on practices and conduct during the period 2011 through the end of 2013. We also concluded additional witness interviews, including interviews with staff of the Board of Correction, I might note. And they concluded that there's a pattern of practice of conduct of Rikers that violates the constitutional rights of adolescent inmates. And as a result, these conditions have resulted in serious harm to adolescent inmates at Rikers. And then the letter ends with, we recognize that Commissioner Pont recently assumed the position and was not present when the misconduct detailed in this letter occurred. We look forward to engaging in good faith discussions with the Commissioner and all interested parties to address the issues we have identified and implement appropriate remedial measures. And then I might also add that the board unanimously signed off on a letter dated August 7th to the mayor, and in the letter that we urge the administration, Mayor de Blasier's administration, to endorse the Justice Department's finding of a systemic culture of violence and announce a plan to reduce this crisis. So today we've asked Director Glazer and Commissioner Pont to discuss the report itself and, even more importantly, the plans going forward. Let me start, Director Glazer, with you.
That's fine. So I think both of us would probably say the same thing. So, obviously this is all in the context of litigation. These are, this is a report that we take extremely seriously, that we're focusing on those issues. I think Commissioner Hunt has sort of made clear from the beginning of his tenure that these are issues that there is a real focus and attention on. But right now we're not in a position because, of where we are in this process with the Department of Justice to really begin to kind of detail all the ins and outs.
Commissioner?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's not litigation yet, it's really an investigation. And in my experience, where I've been involved in other locations where we've been in the same position, our best defense here is an offense, which means let's get as far ahead of this as we possibly can. And I think what you'll hear today as we talk about what we've done with adolescents in the city of New York in the last several months really puts us on in a good position to answer many of the issues that were raised in the Department of Justice investigation. So I think the only way to really resolve this is to prove to the DOJ that one, we take it seriously, and two, that we're not going to settle for meeting their concerns. We're going to have a system, as in most states, is a juvenile system that really treats adolescents as juveniles and adopt the best practices from around the country and bring those here to New York. I can't say much about the lawsuit, but I can say that we started on this 4 months ago, and as it pertains to adolescents, I've done a great deal of work. So it's not the same. RNDC is not the same facility that they visited in 2011.
And then, Commissioner, this isn't on the agenda, but actually, for those who haven't seen it, there was an article today in the New York Times about the fact that the Department of Correction has retained McKinsey along with John Linder as well as CUNY to work with the Department of Reform. It would be great if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I just think it's a great opportunity. Anytime you can get another set of eyes to come in and look at a problem. A lot of the personnel that work in the Department of Correction grew up in that system, so it's really looking with a new set of eyes at all the things that we've looked at over the years, but try to do it as holistically as we can. So we know what the outcomes are. We know there's bad outcomes, the violence is up, assaults on staff are high. All those things are outcomes, but the causes of the problems are really in the system somewhere, and I think that's where McKinsey can really help us drill down into is the staff selection, training. There's a whole host of issues that could be issues. So identifying those causes, which are conditionally causing bad outcomes, is really where I think McKinsey will do a good service in the city of New York. John Linder also.
Thank you. Let me open it up to board members. Judge Hamel?
Thank you, Commissioner. One of the prominent remedial measures that the Department of Justice recommends is essentially moving the youth off Rikers and putting them in a community-based, smaller facility with direct supervision where there can be engagement. And the facilities that they're describing from my certainly touring of Rikers and even off Rikers, now some of the other facilities, doesn't appear to exist. It would seem this is a wonderful window of opportunity to really create a juvenile justice model for this age group. Are you considering moving the youth off Rikers Island into more of a juvenile justice facility that might look more like what we do with our 13, 14, and 15 juvenile offenders who are under criminal jurisdiction as well?
We have looked at that. Obviously, that's a bigger question because it's a city question in the sense of going to build something. We don't have possession-ready buildings that really would adopt well to juvenile or adolescent inmates. Our NDC, because of the physical plan, how big it is and how outdoor rec space that it has, it really can adopt well to much of the programming that we expect in the juvenile or adolescent facility. We've already reduced inmate to staff ratio to 1:15, which is pretty much national standard on adolescents, juveniles, the opposite. We're offering special training. So I think we can do a long, before we get to that question, which would be probably years, if we said, okay, it's a great idea, let's build a facility, it would be years before we could ever do that. So I think we got years of work to get a good program in place, and then possibly another physical plan on the bit. But I wouldn't be opposed to that, but at this point in time, we don't own anything in corrections that we adopt.
Do you have any facility that would allow, because all the programming is wonderful, but part of what the DOJ is talking about is the housing facility itself, where there can be direct supervision, not the linear supervision of the cells, but direct supervision and active engagement with the officers.
We have direct supervision, so I guess it gets a little bit into the definition. So we can't see into every cell, more the new designs allow the officer from one location to see the whole outline of the cell block. But we do have direct supervision where the officer is on post with the inmates and have direct access to them. So it's a model that we already have at our release. And with the reducing of the ratios, 1:15, we think we could be more effective in those interactions. So a lot of what we've learned in juvenile justice is building that relationship between staff and offender is critical in our performance.
Well, in long-term planning, I understand there's about $500 million in the budget for a new jail. Is juvenile justice aspect part of the planning for that new jail?
I'll look at that, and it's changed a little bit over time. Initially, it was talked about having the central intake center. Now we're moving along the lines of having something that'll be more appropriate for mentally ill offenders. That's kind of changing the format, reducing the size of the cell blocks, so it'll be more along the treatment model for mentally ill individuals.
One thing that, Commissioner, maybe what we could do either the next meeting or upcoming meeting is talk about the capital plan. So I think that would be good in terms of the various facets. Dr. Coe.
Yes, very interested in your comments on the ratio. I think we'll be asking you questions further about that when it comes to the young adults. But I would like to hear what the department has done or is going to do next week, tomorrow, regarding the violence issues that were raised by this report. As the Department of Justice clearly stated, they have every reason to believe that what they saw in RNDC is not limited to RNDC, that the culture of violence that they described and the culture of violence that the experts at the board asked to review issues on Rikers Island last year exists, and it means that people are being beaten up and injured on Rikers Island. So I would like to know if there are any policies that you have signed off on or have in draft right now, or have implemented without changing policies, which engage specifically the use of force. For example, have you changed the level of command that can initiate a cell extraction? Rather than having it be a tour commander, should it be a deputy warden? Have you changed the criteria for which someone can, by which are you tracking the number of cell extractions and have you decreased them? Have you, how many more cameras have been in place and how are you monitoring that? I really appreciate your bringing in new eyes as you put it. I don't think the department will benefit by having that analysis, but you have been doing this for a long time, and the practices that there are on Rikers Island need to change now because of the injuries that are at issue. So I've been waiting to hear what you're doing concretely to assure that when a judge remands an adolescent or an adult to Rikers Island, that they know that they're not sending them to a place which is extremely dangerous right now to describe. Thank you.
That's a kind of overly broad question, and we also make a leap of faith that the DOJ, who did not investigate these other facilities, makes a kind of a correlation that what existed at RNDC also exists everywhere else. So with no evidence, and I'm not denying that, but it's kind of an open-ended statement that was in the report.
I'll just say, we can say for the sake of argument that I have reviewed many cases, some of them with, with members of your staff in the previous administration, demonstrating that this is what is going on, more broadly.
So, what we're doing immediately, we've done a substantial focus on RNDC, which has been a troubled facility for a number of years. I think what you see today, we get a presentation of a much different place, for inmates and a much different place for staff. My hope would be to adopt a model that was led by Warden Reno, who was here today, and start to begin to apply that to our other facilities. As we look at 18 to 21-year-olds, I mean, a factor of risk or a factor of inmates misbehaving, age is a factor. So that 18 to 21-year-old group is another group that we need to be focused on, and we'll hear a little bit about that today. Our plans to do it. We are expanding our camera coverage. We're expedited that with money allotted in the city budget to have more maintenance staff who can aid in that installation. I'd like to have cameras everywhere. We've asked the Legal Aid Society who sit on our camera review meeting to say, okay, if there's some place that you like cameras that we don't have them yet, we can prioritize those things. We're in other litigation conversations that will outline a change to our use of force policy, our tactics, our training, and all those things, but I can't, well, if I was left alone, I could probably roll some of those things out quicker. Because it's a point of litigation, we're in a conversation about all of that. So it's part of, I guess, a situation that we can't negotiate from a deficit. So we need to have, kind of everything on the table to talk about. The chief's instituted a number of things. The 21-hour lock-in. We got a uniform policy that we're going to be asking for variances on inmate property, which is causing a lot of weapons and drugs coming. So there's a number of things that we have on the table right today, and some of our facilities, as R&D will show, is greatly reduced the violence. And so I don't have a holistic plan. That's kind of what John Linder or Mackenzie will give us, but we've done some specific things. I know the chief has done a lot of work on reducing the violence.
Okay, other questions for board members?
There was a mention that you had retained McKinsey as a consultant. I just have a question about the Department of Justice report recommends that you hire an outside consultant who would conduct an independent review of the infraction process and procedure to ensure that it is fair and reasonable, affords due process, provides sufficient evidence of a rule infraction, and considers the mental health of the inmate. Based on my review and my tours, it would appear to me that the disciplinary hearing process is flawed. Regarding the mental health aspect, to my knowledge, the only aspect in which mental health is considered is whether the inmate is competent to proceed to the disciplinary hearing. So my question is, will that be part of McKinsey's work, or are you considering hiring another independent consultant?
It may and may not be. It's part of our overall review of discipline in general. We talked about that in my agenda. How we look at discipline, how we process it, what types of sanctions, who goes to say, who doesn't. So that'll be a topic that we'll talk about today. But yes, the disciplinary policy needs to be reviewed. It doesn't matter if it's McKinsey or if we bring somebody else in.
Other questions for board members? It's my understanding, and no questions, the board actually has a resolution. Judge Campbell?
Yes, it's my pleasure as chair of the Adolescent Young Adult Committee to move this board to adopt the following resolution. The resolution reads as follows. The Board of Correction endorses the findings of the United States Department of Justice investigation and report dated August 4th, 2014, finding a pattern and practice of conduct violative of the constitutional rights of adolescents incarcerated in the New York City Department of Correction jail system. The Board of Correction urges the Department of Correction and the City of New York to seriously weigh and consider the Department of Justice's recommendations to implement remedial measures and best practices identified therein.
Let me just, second, any discussion? All in favor? The measure passes unanimously. Thank you. The next agenda item is the New York State Commission on Correction letter regarding punitive segregation. And actually, there was a letter that was sent to Commissioner Pond on July 28, 2014, which stated in part that the New York City Department of Correction has a large number of inmates who, despite being found guilty of violating one or more rules of conduct and receiving a disposition that includes a period of punitive cell confinement, remain in the general population of various department facilities well beyond the adjudication of the disciplinary charges. Delaying imposition, the letter goes on, of sanctions indefinitely undermines both the legitimacy of the department's disciplinary program and the ability of staff to meaningfully enforce the department's rule of inmate conduct. And it goes on to say that they want a plan in which confinement time shall immediately begin serving and really moving toward swift and certain. They had requested a response by August 27th. It's my understanding the Department of Correction had requested a 30-day extension. And Commissioner, it would be great to hear your thinking at this point around punitive segregation and the like.
All right, thank you. Obviously, from the State Board of Corrections look at punitive seg, the backlog, which has been in existence for quite some time. As we looked at this, the punitive seg beds were reduced from 1,000 to about 700 and something that we have today. And the peculiar thing, the backlog didn't grow. So we reduced a number of punitive seg beds available, but the backlog stayed about 1,000. So I've asked Eric Berlin to take a look at that. We've had open meetings with staff and unions to talk about the backlog and how do we get the disciplinary process to work. So it really is today in New York City Corrections the only thing we have. There are no other informal sanctions. So it's either you write a disciplinary report, the inmate gets sanctioned, he goes to punitive seg, or we do nothing. So nothing in between. So we need to look at it holistically. What I wanted to do was to make sure whatever we present is presented in a package. So when an inmate commits a serious infraction, he does go to punitive, or she goes to the punitive seg. And for the other infractions, we'll take a look at those and see if we can do something different. So looking at the backlog breaks down, and here, correct me if I'm wrong on this, to about 400 on historical time, 300 on historical time. Those are the guys who've gotten out and come back, so now they're on the list to go to a punitive seg. So we're having conversations, in fact, conversations about just eliminating it. So we eliminate historic time, and then what do we do with everybody else? So the infractions today, number of inmates in seg on these infractions, about 68% of the backlog for grade 1 was the most serious. 29% is the grade 2, and 2% is grade 3. That's the lesser penalty. So how do we manage the disciplinary process? And you're right, John. Maybe rewrite the policy, but also treat the offenses much differently. And the more serious ones, yeah, you're a danger, you need to go to seg. In the middle of the road, we don't need a 24-hour lockup, but you may be disruptive to the population. So what can we do with you in order to get you out of population? It's not a penalty, but it's not a 23-hour lockdown. But it's some penalty for the infraction. And then 3 was the informal thing, where the housing officer or captain could make decisions of, anything from locking the guy in the cell to taking the right away or phone broker, something informal for the minor kind of infraction. So we talked about all those things, and we're still in process on a number of these. What I don't want to do is come to the board and say, okay, this is our plan, and then 6 months from now have another 1,000, 1,000 inmate backlog. I want to make sure that whatever we put forward, it will be able to maintain itself. So when serious infractions occur, those dangerous inmates go to seg. B guys, when they infract, will go to some level of restriction, but it won't be a 23-hour lockdown. We talk anywhere from kind of half a day out. So if you go to, in that level of infraction, you go to a cell block about half the day you're out, you're free, you go to rent, you go to normal programming, and then you get locked in early in the day. So that's kind of a constant piece, but it's not a 23-hour-day lockdown, and that helps us staffing wise. We don't have the people in restraints and all those things. And then for the class 3. So the thought process is, if we did that, then do we have sufficient segregation space for the field games guys? That's my big concern. And then how do we create these other units and what numbers for the Bs? The Ds, two. And then for the others, really just giving the officers some ability for the informal. I think we've got a long ways down the road. Eric actually did most of the work. He's met with staff, he's met with the unions. So the things that we think we can do at this point is have options where, again, the more serious infractions go to SEG, the secondary infractions go to something less than SEG, and then the other ones won't go to SEG at all. So if we eliminate the historical time, limit the amount of time you can be sentenced to.
Excuse me one second. This is a good piece of it. This is something that this board, Dr. Cohen, has been talking about for a long time. This is a big piece of it.
It is a big step. So if we limited the sanction we could get, which is about 90 days now, sanction 90 days, so it's a 30 days. So that's a big change in the amount of time. So what we've learned in general is punishment needs to be quickly served. So if we got a guy who we wait to do the second time. We believe, when we've been talking with mental health about if we limit to 30 days and then take some of the concerns of people staying long pieces of time in segregation, so some of the concerns that mental health had, the reviews on these guys would be different. Now, we already agreed that the mentally ill, the chronic mentally ill, do not go to SEG. If they don't go, there's caps and other options for them. We're also creating other intense mental health units that you don't need to refract to get to. Those things will be on board October, November. All right, so there'll be other options that we don't currently have. So all of this is kind of a package deal, and how do we manage inmates? And it's not just one size fits all. So we're pretty hopeful. I'll let Eric talk a little bit. He did more work on this than I, but we're pretty hopeful if this fits, then we won't need to increase SEG beds, and we'll manage what we have. And we think in the long run we may need less, but we want to run it for a while to say, you know, is this working for us? Because right now the system fundamentally doesn't work. Officer sees an infraction, he writes an inmate up, basically nothing happens. It doesn't go anywhere. It could be months, and then it becomes, you know, a lot of these guys don't get out. So, Eric, can I just kind of a little bit?
One thing I really want to add is that the goal of the program that we're working toward, is to, and the Commissioner mentioned this briefly, but to prioritize swiftness and certainty at the expense of severity. There's not necessarily a need to put somebody for relatively minor infractions in for very long periods of time if the immediacy of the sanction can serve the same purpose, which is to pull somebody out of population in a dangerous place and make some systemic acknowledgement of punishment. It gives the officers in the housing areas a little more confidence in their span of control, and it's obviously a much more inmate-friendly approach than the one we've had for a very long time.
Can I just ask, what's the thinking around punitive SEG for 16 and 17?
When they do their presentation, the warden will talk about that, but we have very specific goals in mind.
Okay. And I just wanted to, before I turn to the board, I just want to echo my colleague, Mr. Regan, just in terms of that this is a significant and historic movement on the Department of Correction, and obviously, I know the Commissioner and the Department agree with me that we've got to work through the details, but at least the outlines of where the Department is planning to attempt to move to beyond just punitive SEG are nothing but really a series of alternative goes a long ways.
I'd only add, it's going to take us, 2 or 3 months just to clean up the backlog, but I want to do that once and be done with, so we don't have a backlog, once it's done.
So with that, let me turn to my colleagues on the board. Question?
I just want to commend you. I think this is terrific. It is historic. It's what I'm new to the board, but I know this board has been working towards this for a long time. And I really, really appreciate the efforts that you're undertaking to really do much of this reform on your own and run simultaneously.
Dr. Cohen?
I just want to share that. There's a lot to do, but these are terrific actions. I really applaud you. Thank you.
To be continued, obviously. And our next agenda item is one thing I might add, depending on the response in terms of the department and city to the DOJ report, the State Commissioner on Correction, possibility of a board meeting in between on November 18th, but we will just see how that plays out. There'll be further discussion with board members to talk about whether or not it's needed and it's appropriate. The next agenda item, which the commissioners alluded to a couple of times, is the department's plans for the 16 and 17-year-old as well as for the 18 to 21-year-old. Commissioner?
Yes, so good morning, everyone. My name is Lynette Saunders. I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Community Partnerships and Program Development. It is my distinct pleasure to provide you with a brief overview of what we've been doing in regards to the needs for adolescent and the young adult population on Rikers Island, actually in the department. I'd like to say April 7th, as you all know, Commissioner Pont came and joined the department. On April 15th, Commissioner Pont met with myself and my colleague, Warden James Carino, who is the warden at the Robert N. Davern Center, to discuss what his vision was for improving the current conditions. So as you can see, it took him 1 week to figure out that this was a priority. With that being said, he asked Warden Carino and I to convene a work group to determine and to study best practices, evidence-based programs, and to develop recommendations on how to address and define the needs of adolescents in our custody. With that being said, we thought it was very important that we make sure that we include frontline staff, supervisory staff, and our agency partners. We included the Department of Education, the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and we included a number of frontline and supervisory staff and managerial staff to assist us with this process. As you can see, we had folks from the Training Academy, Educational Services, Constituent Services, Operations, Security, Environmental Health Operations, and also the Correctional Officer Benevolent Association. So we had people on the team from the very beginning to help shape what this vision should be. With that being said, I want to show you what the action plan was. We reviewed and evaluated the current practices and policies within the department. We conducted literature review and consulted with experts and leaders in the field across the nation. We identified emerging themes in the research, and we engaged with jurisdictions of interest, and we developed guiding principles and goals. So this is just a few. These are just a few of the organizations and folks that we spoke to across the country. So as you can see, we spoke to Maine, we spoke to Massachusetts, we spoke to Washington, we spoke to Indiana, we spoke to Suffolk County, we spoke to California. We just
They visited some of these sites.
exactly. We also visited some of these sites as well. So I'll move to the next. As the conversations continued for the last 4 months, we noticed that there were consistent themes that emerged from these discussions. And one was age-appropriate programming, professional development, which included recruitment for staff as well as training, collaborative approaches, educational services, and what was needed was a cultural shift. Our guiding principles and goals were to base supervision practices and services and resource allocations decisions on best practices, to support the adoption and the effective implementation of services demonstrated to improve youth outcomes, and to use data to evaluate and direct assistance reform. We wanted to employ an integrated, coordinated approach across the service systems to comprehensively address the needs of youth. And basically tailor the supervision, the programs, and the policies to reflect the developmental needs of adolescents. So the 5 areas of concentration stood as the following: staff recruitment and training, custody management, educational services, program and reentry services, and family engagement. And what we've decided to do is just give you a little brief summary of some of the things that were done. And we can definitely talk offline about more in depth about these steps that we have listed here. So we first designed a screening tool that focused on the identification of staff best equipped to work with the adolescent population. And we utilized it with the recent recruit officer class that just graduated. We also implemented safe crisis management and trauma-informed care curriculums for staff. So in September, actually in June, we started the trauma-informed care, and on September 29th, we'll start the safe crisis management. We also implemented the new custody management model, which was increased the officer to adolescent ratio, which Commissioner Pont just mentioned to you a little bit earlier. But we also have a couple of other things that fall under that category. We're also exploring the recalibration of the classification instrument and exploring options for the alternatives to punitive segregation to make it more developmentally appropriate.
So just because the punitive seg is a question that we had, one of the things that we saw early on was that we had a number of adolescents, 16 to 17-year-olds, at OPCC in punitive seg. We removed all those inmates back to RNDC, the 2 units there. The warden has already undertaken a review of those that he's taken out of seg, that just because of the sentencing was inappropriate, and developing the alternatives to punitive seg is kind of where we're at.
One more thing that I forgot to mention is we also worked very closely with Friends of Island Academy to develop a discharge planning model, which we think is critical to this problem. The issue is that right now we've never had a discharge planning program for 16 to 18-year-olds ever. And so we thought it would be critical to create an aftercare model that would address this issue. And right now, funding is actively being sought for that. As it relates to the young adults, much of the research that has already been conducted on the adolescent population, we find that it's applicable to address some of the needs of the young adults. So as a result, we requested the variance, as you're aware of. We also are in the process of expanding the ICANN reentry services to provide services for 18-year-olds. We're also, we also received the green light to expand ABLE, which is the Adolescent Behavioral Learning Experience, which is the cognitive behavioral therapy that is happening now. We also integrated animal-assisted therapy, and during the summer, July and August in RNDC, we worked with a organization called Life Camp that is quite experienced with working with youth who have gang affiliations. So they've really helped us develop a model on how to integrate violence interruption and prevention services. So we're looking to integrate that also with the 18 to 21-year-olds. And with that being said, we're also looking at other programming options so that we can create robust programming for this young adult population. Some of the budget considerations, as you may imagine, would be training, increased staffing levels, facility renovations that you've mentioned, Judge Hamill, new programs, internal and aftercare. And that's it. That's quite a bit of a brief overview of what's been happening since April.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Questions from board members? Dr. Johnson?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Sounds like a lot of work that's been done. I have a few questions. One is, you noted, the commissioner noted the 1 to 15 ratio for this group. What is the ratio that you think is appropriate for the 18 to 21-year-olds? It's my understanding that that the planning already taking place in GRBC and GMDC for these groups, that there's concern that there be increased staffing from the usual staffing that you have here, that there be a C officer, 2 officers on site during the times when people are out of cell, which is different than the staffing that you've historically provided for those units. So is there a number in terms of, I strongly support the notion that decreased staff to prisoner ratio is the way to assure that you can carry out the programs, that you'll have the escorts when you need them, and that you'll make it a safer place for everyone. So I have a question specifically on that. Is there a ratio for the young adults?
We don't have the program. It's a bigger question, both budget-wise and literature-wise. That's Sonia said. The literature is very good on juvenile. I think I mentioned before, in Maine, we started a 18 to 24-year-old young adults that are state sentence inmates in our juvenile program that's been running since April of this year, which should give us a good, we're probably the only one in the country, it should give us a good sense, will these young adults, we think so, have the positive outcomes put through the juvenile program and get those. So we haven't established those ratios yet. It's a bigger number for us, obviously a bigger budget question, but we know we're going to have to do one or the other, either reduce the inmates or increase the staffing for the programs to be effective.
Other, Regina?
Again, I really applaud you on the initiatives for the 16 and 17-year-olds and the 18 to 21-year-old group. Certainly, it's very consistent with the board's views and rulemaking that we're undergoing. However, there are a few issues. One is that I'd like to address, and that is in light of all of the neuroscience and all of the research about the severe harm that is caused to adolescents and even young adults, the fact that their brain hasn't fully grown, they don't have executive functioning the way adults do. In fact, they have poor impulse control and poor judgment. Is there, and that the harm certainly outweighs any benefit that could possibly accrue. Is there a reason why you're not, as part of your own initiative and your own agenda, ending solitary confinement for these young people, that being the 16 to 17-year-olds in particular, as well as up to the young adult?
I'll let Rob Brino answer a piece of that question, but yes, we're looking at all of that, but you need something in its place. What they saw in the juvenile facilities they visited, they did not have freedom of seg, but they had other things in its place. That's the safe management of kids who act out. So, Warden?
Good morning, Warden James Perino, RNDC.
Morning.
Hello,
How are you? Nice to see you.
Nice to see you also. So we're aggressively looking at every adolescent that we have in punitive segregation. Just recently, on the 2nd of this month, we opened up a housing area we called the Second Chance Housing Area. So what we did, we reviewed every adolescent that we have in punitive segregation, and the ones that at least did 66% of their time, and you know, they're behaving, we put them in this housing area. Right now, I'm happy to say we have 14 individuals in this housing area. Now, what we're trying to do is structure this housing area very carefully, and as the adolescents progress, we're going to shift them into general population, even though this is a general population housing area, and keep on pulling people out of punitive segregation who hasn't seriously injured staff, seriously injured each other, or been caught with a weapon. There's a lot of adolescents that like just said the wrong thing, was in the wrong place. So we're getting them out and we're putting them in the Second Chance housing area. And the shift is, like the commissioner said, to try to get as many people as we can that don't belong in punitive segregation. The commissioner sent me, Commissioner Saunders, and also the team to Maine and Boston, and we've seen successful systems that don't utilize punitive segregation for adolescents. And it was very interesting, but they were quick to tell us it took many, many years to convert, and it was a cultural change. So we learned a lot from their years of experience, and this is what we're trying to incorporate in our thoughts in punitive segregation in RNC.
The answer is yes, we will eliminate punitive seg for adolescents. So what needs to be designed is the programming piece on how do we program them through so we can safely get them back to population. Those are the things that Ms. Saunders is working on. I've asked the warden to give us a time frame on when that would end. So we're actively working on that. That's our goal, to no longer have punitive seg for 16 and 17.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yes, may I just ask while you're working on that laudable goal, which we certainly would applaud you for that as well, in terms of the facility, my experience is that the punitive seg in RNDC is actually, it's dark, it's dingy, the little bit of glass from which you can try to speak to the youth and see the youth, it's opaque, there's some sort of netting there, so it's very difficult to have any type of engagement with the youth there. The punitive seg in OBCC is much lighter, it's much brighter, there's glass, they can see through it, they can see who's coming on the tiers. Not that that should make any difference, but are you doing anything to at least enhance the actual facility that they're being housed in while they're there, ending the punitive segregation?
We painted the floors, we painted the cells, we did the floors, changing the lights in a particular area because we want the environment. When you do come to RMDC, the environment means a lot to us. So that you walk in the doors, as you go into housing areas, the place is a much cleaner place, and it's also very important. I think the main fact why we would like the adolescents to be with us, because our offices deal with adolescents, and it's a different when you deal with adolescents and you care about what you do, like my offices do. It's a different care that they're getting. It's a different consideration. You know, adolescents are different than adults, and it is a huge difference. So my offices are used to dealing with the adolescent needs, and the commissioner feels, that being in RNDC with officers that are trained and deal with them every day is better for them. With the darker, that's our focus all the time. We're changing lights in the tiers. We painted the area. Painted the cells, do the floors. It's a different place than I believe that you might have saw.
And one follow-up question, and as we're moving towards this goal of ending punitive seg, have you considered adding more out-of-cell time and more recreation? Because one thing all of you tell me is they don't really want to get up at 6 or 7 a.m. to go out to recreation, but they certainly could benefit from that while you're ending punitive seg for the youth.
But it's easier for us than modern students because we don't have as many and they don't have a time frame. So our goal is to get them out as much as possible. Matter of fact, the commissioner had us in a meeting just yesterday, to say he wants more and more people out, recreation, get them out as much as possible. So we have a better opportunity to get them out than, because we don't have as many as CPSU does. So our goal is to get them out, get them in fresh air, and get them moving, because adolescents need to be moving, need to be getting out, and like that second chance to get them out totally and give them an opportunity to do the right thing, like other jurisdictions do, and they're very successful with it, is what our goal is.
Other questions?
So, one just quick comment. What we're struggling with is that we're still operating with adult policies over here, so we need to revise a lot of our policies. So the conversation we were having Monday with the team was, you're operating an adult policy here, so let's get back to the juvenile or adolescent policy. So we need to revise that some, and I know that we're
One other question.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you.
In connection with your initiative for 16, 17, 18 to 21-year-old, are you also considering hiring an adolescent psychiatrist who is really trained in properly assessing, treating, diagnosing, and working in prescribing medication for the youth to address their unique needs, which most adult psychiatrists are absolutely not trained to do?
I'll answer that. Since
Yes.
the Department of Health does problems over the healthcare, so absolutely. I'll do this now. I was going to do it at the end, but I wanted to introduce.
Dr. Vendors, if you could just speak up.
Sure. I wanted to introduce Dr. Elizabeth Ford, who's right behind me, who is the new Executive Director of Mental Health for Correctional Health Services. So she now is in charge of healthcare in the city jail system. She comes to us, as many of you know, from Bellevue, where she ran a very successful, very progressive unit where our sickest patients were transferred. We did not have adequate services and care on the island. So she's here to turn every aspect of our mental health system upside down, to see how we bring the community care to every part. And certainly vulnerable populations, including women, adolescents, those in solitary confinement, are top priorities for her. So I think we do want specialized care. It's going to be her determination ultimately, what levels of staffing. We do actually have some mental health professionals, including, I believe, a psychiatrist who have training with adolescents. However, I think that having an adolescent psychiatrist is important, but psychiatrists in our system and in the community mostly prescribe medicines, and most of the adolescents don't need medicines. What they need is interventions, talk therapy, motivation to maybe change behaviors or maybe start to engage about why they behave a certain way. And so it may not be just psychiatrists, it may be clinical social workers and psychologists who have specialized training, but absolutely.
Other, Dr. Cohen?
It may be coming in with the next thing, but just to ask you, for those adolescents remaining in solitary confinement, in either of the solitary confinement or in the other, I'm sorry, I forget the name of the secondary, the other dormitory you described. Those who are in school, what are your plans for them? The current practice of self-study, board members have raised previously is I'm sure something that you want to change. And I was wondering where those discussions, you mentioned that the Department of Education was part of your thing. I can't imagine that they think that this is the way adolescents should receive their education.
Yeah, these are some of the things that are on the table as we speak. So it's being explored at this juncture. It's nothing that I can share.
We talked about tablets. I mean, those are some sort of an active discussion. What we're currently doing in practice is not sufficient. We know that. But we'll get improvement by bringing inmates out. I'll give them some electronic reviews instead.
So, Commissioner, let me just, because I think it's safe to say that my colleagues are supportive of the variance for housing age to 21-year-olds. Some of the issues that we've talked about, I had an opportunity to discuss with you, as well as Kathy Fowler, Executive Director, has had a discussion with Deputy Commissioner Berliner, is the whole notion of training, which I know is something that you and the department, and also the presentation, is a large component of this effort, particularly the state crisis management. And our thinking was that there would be require 25% of the staff to be trained prior to allowing the consolidation for housing of 18 to 21-year-olds. My understanding from the department's vantage point that that's going to be difficult to achieve from the get-go.
Right. I'll let Eric finish this conversation, but reality is that we manage 18 to 21-year-olds now. I mean, they're in population, they're mixed by classification score, so I think whatever we do by bringing them together as a group, by focusing attention on them and looking at increasing programming, even without the training, we saw good results at RNDC before we ever did anything, because the focus was how are we dealing with adolescents. I think we'll see some of that improvement in programming just based on the officer's focus on dealing with this age group. But we're committed to the training piece. But reality is this is a moving train. We got this group of inmates, which is about 1,200 thereabouts, in population now, just kind of spread out in our facilities that we're trying to bring together. To do 18 separately than the 19 to 21 would be very difficult for us. But we're committed to the training piece and the programming piece. But it's a much bigger budget question for us than the adolescents, because they're at about 250. So, Eric.
Yeah, just to add to that, the goal of young adult housing is it's not just to group people together who are a similar age, it's to provide a programmed approach to their day that is age appropriate. It's to incentivize education and other programming that would make sense for young people preparing to re-enter the community from jail. Job training, cognitive behavioral therapy, re-entry programming that's unique to young adult people to start with, and then all of the other programming that we can locate, fund, and provide to them. The experience that we've had at RNDC is that the culture change is probably the most important first step. So starting with the idea that you're managing a different population is the big first step, and it's the one that we've been spending the most time on over the last couple of months as we prepare for this change. The idea that we're going to operate these facilities just a little bit differently very quickly catches on with staff, and so the training is really important, but it's the second step, right? The first step is to get everybody thinking differently and therefore approaching their day, their housing area, their inmates differently. Then the training is the next important step, which is to say, here are some tools by which you can, or with which you can do that. So we do think it's critically important to provide the training. I think the challenge that we're facing right now is that 1,200 people with the staffing ratios we're talking about requires an enormous number of our staff, maybe as many as 20% of our staff, depending on where we land with support staff, will be dedicated to this particular population. And so I think The challenge of getting 25% of those trained very, very quickly is both a logistical one and also, importantly, a budgetary conversation. Within the current procurement rules, we can only train about 50 line staff and 20 supervisory staff in the next 3 months. Beyond that, and we will be doing this once we allocate the funding, but beyond that, we need a much more robust procurement process and a train-the-trainers model that allows our academy staff to take on that responsibility.
And to your latter point, Deputy Commissioner Berliner, is that something that is in the works in terms of identifying, building in additional training going forward?
Absolutely.
So, Dr. Conley,
I want to raise again the issue of staffing, because you've described the success of the RNDC program for the 16 and 17-year-olds as a substantially related to an increase in staffing. As you said, you can decrease the number of inmates, or you can increase the staffing to get a better ratio. And we're very interested in terms of the young adult program. I believe that you're going to have to, in terms of the culture change required, you're going to have to do something there also. And I understand that is not an inexpensive item. But but you're asking us to help you save money at this point by adding the 18s to the 19, 20, 21-year-olds. In my limited experience, freshmen often stay in the same dorm, in colleges. The notion that these 18 to 21-year-olds are all the same is not exactly alike. Your request for us is convenient for you because you don't have to, because it's less suitcases that you have to pack things in by having the 18-year-olds combined with the 19 to 21-year-olds. But it's very important, I believe, that there be a commitment to increase staffing in this population if your programs are going to succeed. And our awarding our granting of a variance, I think, should be dependent upon you're demonstrating that you're going to provide that staff.
So let me just speak and talk about just what I make sure that we're on the same page. So what I would suggest is that the board consider adopting a resolution granting the housing of 18 to 21-year-olds, and that there be a discussion, subsequent discussion with Board of Corrections staff, Department of Corrections staff about the training and what the plans are, not only in the short term, but going forward. So we really can see that be demonstrated. 2, that we continue, as Dr. Cohen has pointed out, that the board continue to look at and review, and that we want to come back to the department looking at the appropriate staffing, possibly the addition of C officers and the like. And that 3, that the department would come back with the timetable at our November meeting about the vocational job engagement, the timetable for violence reduction training for inmates, and then also a timetable for cameras. And as the commissioner pointed out, there are a lot of competing demands for cameras, but to lay that out. So I want to suggest to the board that would be the outlines of the variance that we would subsequently work through our respective staff in the department. Yes?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I know, and it's something we've spoken about, certainly we've got the Prison Rape Elimination Act that now requires that 16 and 17-year-olds be separated from 18s. In March, the end of March this year, the state law was changed to cause all the facilities within New York, including New York City, to separate out the 16 to 17s from the 18s, bringing us into compliance with PREA. So I know that there's a mandate now that the 16 and 17s have to be separated from 18. The law had been 16, 17, 18s. There's a minimum standard that had 16, 17, and 18s. In the course of the fact-finding meetings that I've been holding, I know I've had discussions with various experts on this particular issue, and it does. We certainly want all the services and programs and all the safeguards in place, but I just wish to say that it does seem to me to make sense to house the 18-year-olds with 19, 20, 21, have all these various programs, provided the services and ultimately the training does come into place.
Great. Any other questions? So I would ask for a motion in the context of what I described just earlier.
Yeah, so moved.
Second for Dr. Cohen. All in favor? Excellent. The next issue, Chief Clemens, we might have to turn to you, is the issue of the 9 p.m. lock-in. And many people know in this room that the department began locking in inmates facility by facility, starting with Rosamond Singer, then GRBC, RNDC, GMDC, and this week OBCC. And the most problematic facility was GRBC, and I really want to thank our field team led by Felix Martinez for really being out and about, particularly focusing on GRBC. There was some articles in the press. There was an allegation of an officer assaulting an inmate. That was referred by the board to the Department of Investigation. But Chief Clemens, it would be helpful to get your thinking about what's happening on the 9 p.m. lock-in. Is that planning to continue, and what's the timeline? Thank you.
Good morning. Yes, as you said, we commenced lock-in on August 5th with Rosamond Singer. We ran into an issue with GRVC, a minor glimpse, use of force, but with the use of force being reported, it was brought to the warden's attention, and the disciplinary process was put into effect to take the appropriate action with that incident. That's where an incident where 68 inmates refused to comply with the new lock-in procedure on the 11th. At Rosamond Singer, we ran into a problem on the 7th with the telephones, which we immediately corrected. It was brought to our attention. And since that time, we've had no problems. We did OBCC last night. We commenced with OBCC and NYC. Both went without a hitch. Up next should be the remaining AMKC and the 3 borough facilities, BCBC, Brooklyn, and Manhattan. And it's 1 facility a week. And since the GRBC incident, we've had absolutely no incidents.
And then the reason for the department for heading down this path was really to reduce the incidents, the use of force by use of assault by inmates and the like. From that went to the 9 p.m. 11. Have you seen a reduction on that front in those facilities where there has been a lockdown?
At this time, it's really too early to tell. We'll be able to tell once we complete the entire process. Then we'll be able to give it a good overview of exactly where we at, how is it beneficial to us, and where we stand with it.
Okay, so what I'd like to do, we'll build that into our next board meeting. Anything, Dr. Cohen?
Yes, there were problems in GMDC not related to 9 o'clock. The facility was locked down for almost 3 days in a row, and I went to visit the unit where one of the young adult units, and there were no cameras in that unit, and the warden was aware of that. The department was aware of it. Why did that happen, and what is the plan? We had a report saying that the absence of cameras is related to the use of violence, and why was this unit? This is a young adult unit set up in GMDC where there are no cameras.
Okay. The unit in GMDC is what you refer. We have a priority or a schedule on when we're trying to prioritize the cameras. Right now, we definitely want to get them all the adolescent houses or the young adult houses. However, it's a concern. It's a concern of manning power and getting it following our schedule. So we meet on a regular. We prioritize the list, and we're trying to get cameras. As the commissioner said, we would like cameras in all the housing areas, in all the dead spots, or everywhere in the facilities. However, it's a matter of resources, money, and prioritizing the job. So that's something we looked into. It was an issue over there of violence for several days that we had to lock the facility down and take appropriate action. We commenced searching and conducted a lot of interviews, moved inmates around who was causing the problems to try to get to the bottom line of what was going on in that facility. So that was an issue of concern. It was just happened to be inmates were uprooted in the young adult population to a new environment. And that created, I guess, a vacuum of power struggle.
Right, which is why I raised it. Was that grouping moved suddenly that happened?
Yes.
Other questions on tonight? Thank you, Chief. And now we've got updates, and I really want to try to move us along because we have 9 people that have signed up for our public forum. So the first issue is an update on the CAPS, or the clinical alternative to punitive segregation. Dr. Genters, I'll start with you.
Sure, good morning. So as you know, we have worked for some time to convert what was a dorm unit for CAPS into a cell area. So that's open. We have 2 cell areas that are being utilized very well. Both units continue to be really success for us in that they allow us to take patients who heretofore would have gone to solitary confinement, patients with serious mental illness, and care for them in a clinical setting with steady trained health staff and steady trained DOC staff. So, I would say that one hallmark of the success of the CAPS unit is that, as you know, we are taking the lessons of the CAPS, and the city is already committed to expansion of those lessons and practices into enhanced mental observation. And so it continues to be a very, very strong point of success for both departments.
Any questions by board members? Okay, next update, Dr. Benders, I'll turn to you again. The MOUs of the mental observation unit, the status of the new therapeutic units. Dr. Benders?
Sure. So one of the challenges we face in rolling out the units I just mentioned, enhanced mental observation units, is that there are actually quite a few physical plan requirements, the things that we need if you go to the CAPS unit that don't exist in some of the mental observation units. So in order to fix these units from a construction standpoint, the patients have to come out. And so we now have a timeline that would have the first of these enhanced mental observation units open approximately mid-October, and then over successive weeks we would open the remaining 3, so that would give us 4 of these enhanced mental observation units. We believe that these are important for the care of the patients, but also for the safety of the staff, because we're bringing in a much higher level of staffing for all the types of staff who are going to be working on these units. I think we'll do better by our patients, and we think it'll be also a much better place for everybody to work.
Any questions from the board members? This is for the Department of Corrections. GRBC's building 12 Main. I know that there's a real concern about whether or not this is appropriate for this particular population, mentally ill or aggressive with serious behavioral problems. And Commissioner, just from you or your staff, just what you're thinking going forward.
I think it's, there are violent, mentally ill people. I'm not sure, and I'll let probably Eric and Dr. Mendes weigh in on this, if 12 Main is the best location, but we don't have a lot of good alternatives. It's something I think we need to take a hard look at and make a decision.
So we needed to free up some possible alternative options. We needed the main building at NYC to reopen. That happened yesterday. Today's Tuesday. So that happened yesterday. So this starts to give us a little more flexibility for housing these folks in other locations. We have a couple of good ideas that we're working with internally and also with Dr. Andrews and his team. We haven't settled on a new housing determination yet, but over the next, I think, 1 to 2 weeks, we should be able to have a plan that's implementable very quickly now that we have some sort of space available.
So we'll put that in the next agenda. Dr. Benders, anything to add?
Yeah, just that I think we agree that it's critical to find the appropriate space. I think that every correctional facility has patients that are persistently aggressive, whether they're mentally ill or not. I think that what's critical is for us to find a physical plan and a level of care that helps reduce their level of aggression as much as we can. And I think that, our concern, I think jointly up to now has been that some of those behaviors are actually amplified by putting everybody together in a very small unit that's adjacent to the medical clinic. But I think that we're working hard to find basically a setting that will reduce the level of aggression and behavioral problems to the lowest we can get it.
Thank you.
So just one quick question. We were concerned, I know the board field staff was about inadequate clinical programming available to this population. I wonder if the Department of Health agrees with that and its plans.
Sure. I think that we have not been able to, we have not succeeded in delivering the program we want to. I think that when we have people concentrated in a small physical location, people who have really profound behavioral concerns, it becomes very difficult to pull them out without a lot of amplification of other people egging each other on. And so I think what we need are settings where individuals can cool down, where they can receive adequate medical and mental health care that's not such a chaotic, chaos-producing setting. So that's one of our core criteria, in addition to the really serious criteria that the DOC has about a physical location that's safe for them and their officers.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Then the next issue, which has been on the agenda the last few meetings, is the nursery. I know both departments really wanted to increase the number of moms and infants. I'm just wondering what the status is on that front.
Good morning again. So we're moving really quickly, certainly by our standards. We modified the nursery order in the last couple of weeks to make some of the changes that we talked about at the last meeting in terms of clarifying some questions about people who've delivered infants in the community prior to coming to jail being able to bring their babies in, as well as allowing the possibility for women to enter the nursery once they've been accepted to the program prior to the delivery of their baby to set the area up for actual delivery. We're also actively engaged with ACS about both clarifying their role in the nursery application process as well as expediting the responses that we do get from them. And we are moving forward with a renovation program for the nursery area in phases. There are some, such as backhoeing the rec yard and recreating it, that will take a little longer, and others like painting and lighting and furniture that we'll be doing much more quickly. So the nursery improvement program is moving forward.
I just had a question. This really goes back to what I forgot to ask on the 16 and 17 and young adult. We were talking about RNDC. What's the plan for the women at Rosie's?
We appointed a new warden 2 weeks ago, and basically the same direction as I've given to Warden Brino is let's look at the best gym and specific programming in the country to bring that to Rosie's, something that we have some pieces of there. I think really it's a different way, it's kind of, we hire officers who train to handle adult male inmates, and so really there's enough literature out there to say that we need to go down a much different track. All of our policies need to be adjusted to handling female, both from the adolescent, there's a few that we have, and then adults. So we'll be coming to the board hopefully by November with a good outline on where we're at.
Other questions? I just want to let people know we've been joined by Councilmember Elizabeth Crowley, who's the chair of the Public Safety Committee, and we really appreciate her active involvement and interest around the work of the board and the Department of Corrections, the Department of Health and Mental Health, and actually it's going to be our first speaker in terms of the public. Well, we're going to get there in just a couple minutes. Public forum. And I apologize. I skipped the restricted housing unit, and commissioners, there's some plans in terms of going forward in the context of punitive psych as it relates to the RHUs.
Again, the whole disciplinary package, from the policy to who goes to SEG and how long, and then restricted housing, is all part of that overall plan that we'd like to get in front of the board, which requires some variances, but it's how do we manage inmates? So it's all part of that overall package.
Excellent. And then moving along, and Commissioner, you referenced this before, uniforms and property retrieval and storage, and there's been some discussion, and I know it's a work in progress, but where that's at.
Good morning, I'm Shavana Gobin. We hope by mid-October we would have centralized all valuable property. So when an inmate is released from our custody, they'll be able to retrieve their valuable property upon discharge. We also exploring institutional uniforms.
At any time, so looking at any time on discharge.
They'll be able to get their valuable property. We're also exploring institutional uniforms for all inmates. We have placed an order with our vendor. Our first influx of uniforms will come in October 1st, and we'll start implementing to our population.
Thank you. Other questions? And then the whole issue of workplace safety. As many people know, on August 7th, OSHA found that Verizon, who contracts to the Department of Health and Mental Health, contracts that not only failed to protect its employees adequately against workplace violence and assault. And I was just wondering, Dr. Bender, just turn to you, what the status is, and more importantly, the plans going forward as it relates to that.
Sure, thank you. So many of the people in the room have actually been key partners in addressing some of the workplace safety issues. We started about 6 months ago convening labor, all the health and also COVA labor groups together with management to talk about, and with our two vendors, there's two vendors actually that provide health services, Verizon and Damien. And so we've made inroads and progress in several areas. Physical plant of several facilities have been really upgraded. Department of Corrections has directed leadership in each jail, but also senior leadership and security staff to participate in walkthroughs and also to have regular meetings with our staff. And so I think that health staff report to us that they feel like progress has been made. However, we have not fixed the problem. It continues to be a crisis for our health staff, and continuing improvement is needed by us, particularly in coming up with plans for individual workers so that workers understand when they're in a situation that they perceive to be unsafe, how do they react? And so we're working very hard with Horizon, but also with our partners in corrections, to come up with scenario-based training that every health staff member would go through. It's a standard of workplace safety plans, and we need that here. The other thing is that in some of the settings where the safety concerns are the most acute, such as the mental observation units, we have, with the enhanced mental observation units, committed more staffing, because we think if we're going to ask staff to work in settings with people that we know have behavioral concerns, we should have higher ratios of staffing and more, and also smaller housing areas or areas with fewer patients in them, to kind of help identify earlier on people who may have a behavioral problem, may act out against staff, against another patient, or against a correction officer. So much more work to do.
Questions from the board on that point? And any other business before we turn to our public forum? And we actually have 9 speakers. As people know, you have 2 minutes. We want to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to speak. And we wanted to start with Councilmember Crowley. We've got a podium right there. Councilmember, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Elizabeth Crowley. I chair the Fire and Criminal Justice Committee at the City Council, and we have the oversight on the Department of Correction. And I became the chair of this committee back in 2010. And the committee back then and the council had sounded the alarm on the increasing violence on Rikers Island. And year after year, I felt that the Bloomberg administration did not put the funding behind the needs. I'm happy to report that when we passed the budget this year, the city, the mayor showed a real commitment to reform and put $32.5 million into the budget on Rikers Island to hire more correction officers and more clinical staff to achieve some of the goals that our new commissioner has set forth to achieve. And I want to say good morning to the commissioner and to thank Commissioner Pump for his commitment to correction, and the entire board here for all the dedication and service you give to this very needy cause. As many of the people in this room know, Rikers is suffering from chronic issues of deteriorating infrastructure, severe understaffing, and a growing mentally ill population that requires specialized care. And even though the inmate population has been decreasing year after year, the incidence of violence has continued to rise, and correction officers are working an unacceptable level of overtime. In some cases, correction officers are clocking in 80 hours a month. And now this is from reports in the beginning of the year, first 3 months of the year. The U.S. Attorney's report indicates that even our youngest inmates are not being protected from violence while in the city's custody. The Department of Justice has highlighted several reasons for the violence and specified many reforms that need to be implemented. The committee will be having a hearing on October 2nd, examining the report and also the recommendations. Chief among the recommendations is exploring ways to immediately move the adolescent inmates off Rikers Island, which I wholeheartedly support, and house them in a facility that will allow for better supervision and better programming. With the benefits of a new facility, we can better prevent incidents of violence from occurring in the first place. We need to really re-examine the way correction officers are trained. They do have some of the toughest and most stressful jobs in our city. We do a great disservice to them currently, and to all New Yorkers, when we do not equip them with the proper training and the tools to do their job as best as possible. The city currently does not provide specialized training to COs to manage adolescents. And their minds are still not fully developed, and they can be more impulsive. Our correctional officers need to be able to manage these different populations, whether they're mentally ill or adolescent. They have unique needs, and we need to make sure that we develop a comprehensive training program. Over the last several years, the mentally ill population on Rikers Island has drastically increased, and now some cases makes up nearly 40% of the entire jail population, an even greater amount in the adolescent population. With the mounting reports on mentally ill inmates doing harm to themselves and others while in the custody and after release, I am extremely concerned that the Department of Health and the Department of Correction do not have a comprehensive plan to properly manage this population. The only way we can achieve real reform is by lifting the veil of secrecy that has loomed over Rikers Island and begin a candid discussion about conditions and the culture of the facility. Last month, the City Council passed unprecedented legislation requiring transparency on the use of punitive segregation and solitary confinement on Rikers. We believe with this new legislation, we'll have an idea to understand the data on how often solitary confinement is used and what happens to inmates while in solitary confinement. The problems on Rikers Island have been decades in the making, but I'm optimistic that now we have the right leadership and momentum to discuss reform. And what is the threshold of acceptable use of force in our jails? I want to continue to work with the board and encourage any member that hasn't met with me privately to have a meeting where we could talk about what you believe are the major hurdles to achieving those reforms and moving this department forward. And we will continue to work with the commissioner of both the Department of Correction and Department of Health to achieve goals and to improve our overall criminal justice system. Thank you for allowing me to speak this morning. And again, thank you for the work that you do.
Councilmember Crowley, I really want to thank the council, particularly you, for your leadership and really playing a very active role. And actually, at the beginning of the meeting, commended the council for the legislation that was just adopted. And it goes without saying, but it's important to say that your issues and the council issues are the issues of the Board of Corrections as well. So many.
And I know that the board is committed to helping the most vulnerable population, our adolescents, our 16 and 17-year-olds. I would like to move them off the island. I know that there are a number of financial hurdles, and I know that our adolescents need the space and the programming, and I just believe the overall emotional way of getting to Rikers Island off the city and far away from most of our 5 boroughs, with the exception of Queens, is not fair to the young and to their families. And I believe that they are the population that we could really affect change and get involved with the social programs that they need to make them more productive citizens and less likely to be recidivists.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Judge Michael Carrero. Carrero?
I don't think I need the podium. I think you can hear me. I don't know if you can hear me there, but first of all, I'm very happy to follow Councilwoman Crowley because she pretty much said everything that I would like to say. Let me just say this. I was a prosecutor for 4 years. I was a criminal defense lawyer. I was a judge for 28 years in the criminal courts of the state of New York. I've worked with many of you. I've worked with many of you, and I've been to Rikers Island many times in many capacities. And I'm here today because I believe, unquestionably, given what I saw in the U.S. Attorney's report, that 16 and 17-year-olds should not be on Rikers Island. That Nelson Mandela said there can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children. Now, this is not symbolic that these children should be dealt with, and I call them children because they're 16 and 17, they're adolescents, they're not, New York, as you know, is one of only 2 states in the entire nation that sets the age of criminal responsibility as low as 16. So in every other state, these 16 and 17-year-olds would be in a juvenile-type facility initially. And only the most dangerous would be in a locked-up kind of situation. So these children don't belong on Rikers Island. And you're making Herculean efforts to deal with a systemic issue. And just as you said, Commissioner Hunt, today in the New York Times, as you were quoted, how do you deal with juveniles in an institution where correction officers were hired because of the way in which they were prepared and trained to deal with adult offenders? We can't do it. It's inconsistent. It doesn't make sense. The only way to do it, in my view, is as Commissioner Crowley indicated, take these young people off of Rikers Island. You can keep them under the jurisdiction of the Department of Correction and correction officers. Commissioner Perino's indicated and outlined a real change in attitude towards the 16 and 17-year-olds. And that's what this is about. This is a change of attitude. It's a change of way in which we ought to look at these young people. So my statement here is simply to urge you to adopt the recommendations of the board and to urge you to adopt the very first recommendation of the attorney, the U.S. Attorney's report, which is to create a place off of Rikers Island for these young people.
Thank you, Judge Guerrero. Our next speaker is Lori Davidson from the Doctors Council.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lori Davidson from Doctors Council, SEIU. We're the union that represents the doctors and dentists working in the correctional health system. So I want to thank the board, first of all, for providing the public comment session, because that wasn't always there, and I appreciate the new openness and all the work that the Board of Corrections is doing to make positive reforms at Rikers. Doctors Council, SEIU, and other healthcare unions working at Rikers, NYSNA, and 1199 are encouraged by the recent ruling of the U.S. Department of Labor Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, especially in light of the recent assaults and injuries sustained by the medical staff working at Rikers Island. Their safety is paramount, and for too long, dangerous working conditions went unaddressed, and which prompted this action. We hope this ruling is a step towards improving safety standards and protocols for the dedicated health professionals working at Rikers Island. Horizon is the employer of healthcare staff at Rikers, and they have a responsibility to act. But in order to most effectively enact change, all involved parties must work together. We are calling on the Department of Corrections to be a partner with Horizon on implementing the recommendations outlined in the OSHA ruling. These recommendations merit close examination and swift implementation. These include the development and implementation of a written workplace violence prevention program for all health staff, assessments of the numbers of inmates and security staff relative to Horizon health staff, filling of vacancies of health staff to be fully staffed, increased information for health staff on inmates that pose high risk for violence and how to handle such patients, better scheduling and escort systems to reduce wait times and increase access to timely care, and formal post-incident procedures. Furthermore, physical plant changes are emphasized in the ruling, such as installing panic alarm systems, cuff bars, plexiglass, as well as the reconfiguration of treatment rooms to allow for easy exit. Employee training for Horizon staff on safety and security procedures and on how to prevent or minimize risk of assault is critical. Joint trainings with correction officers to create a team approach to safety and to outline clear expectations of the role of the correction officers, health staff, and management. These recommendations should not come as news. In fact, many of the representatives and unions here today have been involved in recent discussions through an informal interagency working group that has met twice at Rikers in the recent months. OSHA's citation has formalized the many reforms we've been advocating for over a year. Working with the New York City Board of Corrections, the Doctors Council will continue to take a leadership role and convene various parties, including the Department of Corrections, DOHMH, NYSNA, 1199, COBA, and other stakeholders, to ensure that stronger workplace safety standards at Rikers Island continue to be a priority. We encourage starting up the informal working group meetings and the monthly safety reports again. Equally important.
30 seconds.
Okay, equally important are the regular safety meetings that have taken place in each facility on a regular basis, We want to ensure that the action plans from these meetings are followed through on in a timely manner. The healthcare staff are caregivers first and foremost. And at the end of the day, the primary goal of the doctors and health staff is to provide quality, timely care with dignity to the patients at Rikers. They just don't want to risk their lives to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Davidson, if we could get a copy of your remarks as well as Councilmember Crowley's, because I'd like to, going forward, any written remarks to incorporate into our minutes.
Okay.
Our next speaker is Marcia Tilley from the New York State Nurses Association.
Hello, my name is Marcia Tillery. I'm an RN at Rikers. I've been here for 25 years. On the behalf of the RNs at Rikers, we would like to echo the statements of our partners at 1199 and Doctors Council. In addition to their proposals, we propose a solution that we would like to improvise. We need swift implementation of safety measures and clear timelines of completion. Clear protocols to whom, where, and how to report incidents of violence and near misses between the employees and Department of Correction. It is essential for us to be able to track these incidents and find out how to work through them. We are looking forward to working with the Department of Correction and all our other partners to bring an end to incidents of violence on Rikers Island. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Ms. Tilley. Our next speaker is Hilton Zermeyer from the Legal Aid Society Prison Rights Project.
Good morning, I'm Milton Zellmeyer from Legal Aid Society, Prison Rights Project. Thanks again for opening this up at the meetings. It's been a great development. First, I'd say it was good to hear from Amanda Masters that the rulemaking process is ongoing, and we look forward to a proposed regulation coming out of that process. Legal Aid is glad to have been part of the process that predated that actually helped get the petition for rulemaking process initiated in the first place. It was a rule that the board needed to engage in, and now we see it at work. Regarding the variance that's been passed today, or the request for variance has been approved, it's another occasion when we have I think we did respond in writing, submit comments. It's another example of our supporting the substance of the variance, but not the process of using the variance. We think that's highly overutilized, and these types of issues should be addressed more in changes to the standards rather than continuing to graft variances onto the standards. So I hope the board will consider that as it moves along. With regard to the outline that the commissioner gave of changes in the offing for the use of punitive segregation, he mentioned some changes with regard to the disciplinary process itself. We hope the board will keep in close contact with the department about those changes to make sure they meet due process standards, including, we just wouldn't assume that that's not necessary for these more informal arrangements that might be made. Those should also be looked at very carefully. Thank you.
Thank you. And to your point about the variance versus the rulemaking, that Judge Hamlin and I were talking about this morning, that's something we're going to be considering this whole housing cohort, this possibly building in the rules. So thank you and your colleagues.
I would just add, there was a brochure that was about adolescents and juveniles that was out on the table when I came in. It's very good. It's very informative, but it actually makes it feel like this is something that should be addressed in standards revision rather than a variance. Obviously, the brochure was prepared in with confidence that the variance was going to be granted, which is fine, but it makes it look like it's more permanent than what should be addressed in a variance.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jennifer Parrish, who's with VERA, Urban Justice, as well as with the Jail Action Coalition. Ms. Parrish?
Good morning. I'm here to speak not for myself, but for Santos Bobbitt, who is a formerly incarcerated person. He was planning to speak today, but was called away into work unexpectedly. So I'm just going to read his statement. As I mentioned, he's formerly incarcerated. I think he has an important information to share about the 9 p.m. lock-in. He writes, I am Santos Bobbitt, president of the Association Pro Inmate Rights, NYC of New York State. Though I'm here today as a productive member of society, I come to you with the experience of an ex-convicted felon, a person whose career was that of selling heroin, a career which surely took me to the various places you were in charge of overseeing. In particularly, we, the New York State Nietas, are interested in Rikers Island and the incident, events, and circumstances happening there. Let me briefly take you to the time when I found myself there. In those days, the Association Pro Inmate Rights, NYC, wasn't a movement working for inmate rights. Instead, we were one of the most feared gangs in Rikers Island, feared both by inmates and correction officers alike. I say this not to glorify it, but to allow you to understand my past. In those days, I lived in ways this board probably couldn't imagine, but all that's irrelevant now. We Nietas understand that us inmates have our faults in some of the bad things happening at Rikers. I'm not here to cover that or try to minimize that. We, however, understand the need for this board to have the input of those who live through the majority of the incidents, which are most times not created, that are most times created either by the decision-making of the Department of Corrections, by the lack of proper training of individual officers, or their character defects of correctional officers. Through that chaos I lived in the 90s, I can surely say I saw all kinds of inmates, Black and Latino alike, Bloods and Latin Kings, Crips and Trentorinos, 5%ers and Nietas, trying to live moments of tranquility, where in the most parts those feelings of anguish, desperation, and confusion stopped, asking for ways to escape through anger, and brought a sense that another way of living could exist in Rikers Island. In these moments, I saw cultural unification. I saw sharing. I can even say I saw mutual respect and understanding. Instead of positively using that moment, the DOC, in the time it takes a correction officer to relieve another, would make all the calmness go back to that chaotic daily living. Why, you ask? More times than not, it would come from correctional officer attitudes towards inmates, from the fear of a united dormitory, or from new protocol decisions. These acts would spark the violent pilot, which would fuel a couple more months of violence. This is why the Nietas are here speaking today. The decision of taking 2 hours away by locking in at 9 p.m. From the people at Rikers Island is exactly that destructive decision-making that would fuel more violence in Rikers Island. We may see 2 hours as nothing, taken for granted as simply time that passes us by. What would, or rather you can do in 2 hours? Let me tell you what an inmate can do in 2 hours. Some can speak on the phone to their family, and before the 2 hours are over, would have sat and written a letter to the same family and included a drawing of that conversation. In 2 hours, an inmate can shave, shower, grab a snack, or even help another inmate with his or her hair. Watching a TV show or talk to a fellow inmate about how good or bad it was. Some even take this last few hours of the day to work out or vent their feelings with inmates about how hard things are getting at home, or simply the time to catch up on things that are happening with themselves. All the things that can bring help and relieve stress being in jail can bring. Norman Seabrook and Pont may paint the picture that in these few hours, inmates are simply being violent. That this is when most of the violence happens, or what rhetoric they feel justify this grave mistake. They fail to notice that when violent acts occur, it is not done by every person in Rikers. To better paint the picture, not even from every gang member in Rikers, but their decision of implementing this lock-in program definitely increases that number. It's bad enough that most feel that they're unfairly treated, mostly that their bail is too high for them to pay. Now Seabrook and Pont have made all the inmates feel guilty of violence by punishing the entire population with this lock-in program. This program makes inmates more stressed out, violence is definitely going to increase, and the safety of inmates and correctional officers put at risk. The mistake of making decisions on a group of people without taking into consideration their mental health or their classification makes everyone not to want to care anymore. I understand that there's a time limit, but there are several speakers who spoke more than 5 minutes, and no one who's formerly incarcerated has been able to speak here. He just has 2 more paragraphs. I think they're worth hearing. I can guarantee you that pretty soon inmates who've never fought, arguments that usually can be stopped from escalating, and those small amount of actions that aren't so disrespectful would turn to a fight, all because our mental stability wasn't included in an assessment of the decisions of Seabrook, Pont, and the higher-ups at the New York City Department of Correction. We ask that the lock-in program be taken out. We suggest that if Seabrook and Pont feel that the need to de-escalate violence in Rikers Island, they must include inmates and community folks in conversations that may lead to a decision of a better caliber. Clearly, the action of the men at GRBC show the need for inmate input. We feel that it's the only way violence can truly decrease without causing more stress on a population of humans who already wake up in a chaotic environment and the correctional officers who are supposed to be trained to protect them. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Steve Roberts from the jail. National College. Mr. Roberts.
I am a formerly imprisoned child prisoner. I started the time at 16 years old. I can tell you that I've done time in punitive confinement, and that it was the worst thing that one could possibly imagine, being in a cell with nothing. Back then, back in the 70s, obviously I'm not 16 years old anymore, but back in the 70s, when I was doing punitive confinement, they were stripping. You went in the cell with underwears, no books, nothing. So, from what I heard, it's still the same. They're talking about introducing self-study time, but they haven't done it. Do it. The child's brain is still developing. Let me tell you something. I renounced U.S. citizenship more than once. I went to Cuba to be free of the repression of the U.S. state because of what I suffered in those cells. Your correction officers sent other prison inmates at me to jump me, a 16-year-old kid. This is the type of violence that is perpetrated against children on Rikers Island. Get them off the island. They shouldn't be there. And I suffer to this day. I have life. Every time I gotta go see my parole officer, I go through an anxiety fit. So what you have to do is you have to consider your children. I was wrongfully convicted. I'm fighting my conviction to this day. Don't have children go through what I'm going through. I don't think, to my knowledge, that I have mental problems. I believe whatever problems came out of the situation came out as a result of the trauma that I suffered at the hands of the police that was supposed to be helping me. Why would they send 5 people at a 16-year-old kid? You forced me to learn to defend myself. So what I'm saying to you is stop perpetrating that violence. Stop using the searches to harass and abuse the prisoners, because that's what you're doing. And you just said it, Mr. Clemens. You said you were sending the people in there to search the cells. And you know what you was telling people like me? Bend over and crack a smile. How you gonna tell a kid that? What was the point in that? Having 6 or 7 police standing around chuckling, telling a kid to bend over and crack a smile. What kind of effect does that have on that child? So what I'm saying is that the trauma that I suffered to this day, post-traumatic stress syndrome, is a result of the abuse that I suffered at the hands of the prison slave industrial complex. And it continues to this day. Get those kids off the island. Help those kids. Let them study. Let their minds develop properly. Give them a direction. Don't destroy their minds. Don't do it. Just treat them like human beings. Because the torture that I suffered, no other human being should ever suffer. So this is all I'm saying to you. Get those kids off the island. And once you do that, put them in a facility where you can help them, train them, develop them. These are your children. These are your children! And you're killing them!
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. That's our last speaker for the public forum. Our next board meeting is going to be November 18th in this room, and we might possibly have a meeting before that. I would ask for a motion to adjourn. Second, all in favor? The meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's